Okay, so I want to talk now about Elminage Original. This is a game that I have played on live streams in the past, but I've never really dedicated any content to before. I've never done a review of it before. It's an old game. I am playing the PSP version through a PlayStation TV most of the time. I also play it on the Vita now and then, but most of the time I'm playing it on my TV in my office through the PlayStation TV. And so the graphics are stretched out on a big screen, and you can see all the jaggies. They look kind of like, I guess, maybe PlayStation era if the PlayStation games had not started going really 3D. So if you see a few like pixel art games from the PlayStation 1 era, it's kind of that quality, I would guess, that I'm seeing. Now, there is a PC version that has much smoother and sharper visuals, but I'm playing the PSP version. I really just prefer to play with a gamepad. But I bought this game years ago. It is a turn-based, grid-based, first-person, party-based dungeon crawler that's really just about the dungeons. And I talked about this kind of game a little bit when I reviewed recently Labyrinth of Refrain, Coven of Dusk. It's a very specific type of game, and many of them that are out there have a heavy Japanese anime, or just not specifically Japanese, but a heavy anime aesthetic, and which I dislike. So to find one like this that, yes, it had a little bit of that anime aesthetic, but not in any of the cutesy or sexy kind of way. I guess some of the creature designs, the female monsters, can lean a little bit into that. But that's, I think, of less being an anime thing and more like a old school sword and sorcery aesthetic that was unfortunate. That they're kind of carrying through into this game. But the gameplay, man, there's just something about the gameplay here. When I bought it for that plane ride to visit my wife Holly's family out in Pennsylvania, it's a 5-hour plane ride, I was shocked. It was one of the first times that our boys were old enough, so it's been a few years because our boys are 11 and 14 now, so it's been plenty of years that they've been self-sufficient and not needed a bunch of care and management during flights like that. But this was one of the first flights, maybe about 5 years ago, where we could even sit separate from each other. Like Holly could sit with both boys, or I could sit with both boys. I was shocked at how this game had me riveted for the whole 5-hour flight out there. And then I didn't feel like I was missing my home console at all, just having the Vita on this trip, because of how sucked into this game I was. It was the first of this type of game that I think I had ever played. I'm trying to remember. I think maybe it was. But the elements that I loved about this game and that are defining about this game are the elements that I loved about the original Final Fantasy on NES, the original Dragon Warrior / Dragon Quest. Before those games started to become more advanced and have villages with a bunch of people to talk to and quests to go find and, all these NPC interaction type stuff. Really, my favorite games were before things got so advanced with JRPGs that you were watching big long cutscenes and having conversations that go on and on or whatever, I'm just like, I just want the dungeons, man. I just want the dungeons, the loot, the upgrading of my guys. I want interesting but not overly tactical decisions to make during combat. And so this game was I had never played Wizardry before, because that's a PC game and I just don't really play on PC. But I knew when people said it's a Wizardry style game, I knew enough through pop culture osmosis what they were talking about. But this was my first game of that type, I think, that I really gave a good try, and it sucked me in. Now, since then, for various reasons, I've tried some other dungeon crawls that I maybe... I don't know, I've just, in different seasons, lost interest in Elminage Original. But I came back to it recently because I did that review of Labyrinth of Refrain and found about 15 to 20 hours in, I was like, I'm liking this. I'm liking a lot about this. But it's still not... I talked about this on the podcast last week, so you can go and listen to that if you want to get the details. But it wasn't quite what I wanted. Then I got into Undernaut's Labyrinth of Yomi, which is made by the same people who made Stranger of Sword City. And I was really digging Underknots. Like, oh my gosh, yes, this is it. This is it. Serious visual aesthetic, no cutesy anime stuff going on, and it's just the dungeons, ma'am. I was super into it, but I was like, oh, you know, I should wait, and I should do Stranger of Sword City first, because the same people that made this one made that. I don't want to go backwards. I want to see the development of their ability over time, and I've always wanted to pull the trigger on Stranger of Sword City. I just kept waiting for a sale. Well, the sale never came, and Vita is all but put out to pasture by PlayStation. I don't even think they're putting sales on of any kind on there anymore. But I saw $30. I was like, you know what? I just got Underknots for $30 on discount. That's a good deal if I'm going to enjoy it, and I'm probably going to enjoy it. So I bought Stranger of Sword City, played about 5 hours of that. I was like, oh, yes, I'm really enjoying this. And then I thought of Elminage Original. I thought, you know, if I totally dive into Stranger of Sword City and continue to enjoy myself like I am so far, I don't know if there's any going back to Elminage Original. I don't know, because there's some problems with Elminage Original that hamper my enjoyment and have hampered my enjoyment or caused me to just kind of lose interest, and I'll get into those. But I thought, you know, now's the time. You're probably, I was like 70 hours into the game, 70 or 80, somewhere between 70 and 80 hours into that game. Played sporadically throughout the years. But I was like, I think I'm close to the end of at least the story on this. I should just dive back into that and play it into the ground, meaning play it until I'm totally frustrated and I know I'm done with it forever, or I finish the story, or feel like I finished the experience. And so even though I had just bought Labyrinth of Refrain, which I do plan on getting back to, I was having a great time with that. It just wasn't quite dead on target, dang it. And I bought Underknots at the same time, so of course I was at least going to give that a try when it arrived in the mail. So Labyrinth of Refrain, I'm going to get back to. Underknots and Stranger of Sword City, definitely going to get back to. But Elminage of Original, one more try. Here we go. And I'm loving it. Oh my gosh. I think part of it is knowing I'm toward the end, and that's kind of propelling me. But there's still so much going on in this game, even with its flaws. And I'll share kind of my thoughts on both what I'm really digging about it and its flaws in case you want to give it a try, because I think you can buy it if you have a Vita or a PlayStation TV still, maybe. I don't think the PSP store is even functioning anymore. But you can always play it on PC, and if you want to play on gamepad, the system requirements are going to be really low, so even if you don't have a gaming PC, you should be able to run this with, I don't know, like a tablet or something if it's compatible. But anyway, I bought Elminage Gothic, which is the sequel, and that is totally gamepad compatible, so I would imagine that the Elminage Original on PC is as well. So, yeah, let me share my thoughts on this, and then also wrap up with some thoughts about what I think this game brings to mind for me, that's related to how God made me and maybe how God made you as well. Okay, so first up, the enemy variety is still really, I wish there was a good website to go to find like a count of the number of enemies. There are some palette swaps, but there's just a lot of original art. When I compare it to, say, Skyrim, there's easily a much wider variety of enemy types in Elminage Original than Skyrim. And I'm still running into new enemies now, like, well, actually, right now I'm at 103 hours into the game, but and even now, I'm still running into enemies that are either new art, or it's been so long since they were last used with a different color palette that they don't look familiar to me at all. And with those, the new enemies, it's not just, it's higher stats and a different visual, but there's different abilities that they have, different weaknesses that they have, and then different compositions of groups of enemies that you'll run into. And each of those combinations of enemy parties you can run into, and the weaknesses and the abilities that enemies have, really makes every encounter one that I have to at least give some thought to. I have to think, okay, who do I need to kill first? Okay, that guy can put up the reflect barrier, and I definitely want spells to take out that other guy that's in the third row. And there's divisions of rows as well, and so if you only have like a short range weapon, you're only going to be able to attack the enemies that are right in front of you, and your heroes are in rows as well. The first 3 from left to right are in the front row. The 4 through 6 are in the back row. And so you're having to keep that in mind, but it's not so tactical that it's like a tactics RPG. It's not that category, but neither is it like spamming the attack button by any means. I don't think I've ever once... Well, no, it's not true. There have been times where, like, especially like more than halfway through a fight, when I've taken out the heavy hitters or the ones that have weird abilities that might silence me or put my guys to sleep or do some weird thing that's going to just throw off my normal way of approaching combat. Then I'll, once the troublesome ones are taken care of, I'll just auto-select attack for everybody, and then pop, 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 it fires them off really quick, And like the dungeon crawl games of this type that I enjoy, even when I'm selecting actions for each individual character, once I've selected them all, they get carried out all back-to-back, one after the other, in really quick, snappy animations. It's not these long, drawn-out animations that Final Fantasy normalized and that really slowed down combat. And so, between having the snappy, quick animations and not having a real-time or an active-time battle system, the combat is always moving as fast as slow, or as fast or slow as I can think. And as I said in my review for Labyrinth of Refrain, I think turn-based games got a bad rap because of active-time battle systems, which sometimes can kind of keep you on your feet and like, oh man, I gotta think quick. But other times, when you know really easily what to do, you end up waiting for that meter to deplete before your next character can take its turn. Same with the big long spell animations. They look cool at first, but you get used to them. They get old. And by 20 hours into the game that has big animations and active time battle systems, you're getting bored in this turn-based combat. But when you keep it like these types of games, the combat is always engaging and moving as quickly or as slowly as you want it to move. It's really cool. Let's see here. And the party members that I have also complement each other really well. It's, like I'll say, okay, well, this guy I need to sleep these guys first, and that's the first order of bit, or I need to maybe silence them first, and then this guy will make them weak to my magic spells, and then my mage that has nothing but offensive spells will really come in hitting hard, So there's synergies between your different class characters that's really fun to realize, oh, okay, I should do this first and then this, And again, without being bogged down into like a full-on tactics RPG, the decisions are relatively quick. I might pause at the beginning of battle and just assess what the layout of monsters is in front of me, and then I'll say, okay, gotcha. Okay, yep, here's what I do. Boop, boop, dup, 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 And then what else? Let's see here. Oh, and there's a wide variety of classes and races to choose from, which the classes and races will have an effect not just on skills, but on what weapons you can equip. And there's multi-classing options as well. I haven't really dipped into those, but I mean, there's a ton here that makes me think that if I wanted to come back and play this game a second time, which I probably will not, and that has to do with the things that hamper the experience for me, but if I wanted to come back to it, I could have a very different experience, because I could have I could have a whole different adventuring party without, I think, repeating a single class. And you have 6 people in your party, so what is that, 12 classes at least, I think? Anyway, lots and lots of options. One thing that made a big difference for me in re-energizing my interest in this game was realizing that I had plenty of funds built up at this point to have the shopkeeper appraise the loot that I would find that's unidentified. This is kind of a classic idea from classic D&D. You can find items that have some properties that you can tell make them unique and special maybe, but you don't know what they are, so you either need to have someone in your party capable of identifying them, or you need to take them to a specialist in town that can identify them, and that's called appraisal in this game. And there's a character class that you can bring along to appraise things, but I didn't want to do that, so I just kept him waiting in the wings. You can keep extra characters waiting at this tavern, and you can go there, which I had done for most of my time playing. Probably the first 70 hours of this game. I just kept a guy that could appraise in the tavern. I would come back with a boatload of loot. I would swap out one of my guys, swap in the appraiser, and then he would appraise stuff. But one thing that kept happening that was frustrating to the experience, that took away from the joy of looting and feeling like, oh my gosh, I got some good stuff here. Maybe anyway, once I identify it, we'll see. Something that took away from that significantly was that the identifier, the appraiser in my party, would sometimes get cursed from identifying things. And that would not happen. Well, I discovered recently that the shop, I don't know why I never noticed this before. I think I'd been leaning on the technique of having a reserve member be my identifier because it was free. But now it's been so many hours into the game that I just forgot about this whole appraisal option, and actually that it's not that expensive, and nothing bad happens. If it's a cursed item or something like that, okay, great, I just sell it. But I had been like avoiding picking up loot for a while because the stuff that would get appraised, a lot of times it was worthless or cursed or whatever. And I think there must be some algorithm that, I don't know. I feel like once I started having the shopkeepers do the appraising, I started finding a lot more items that were not only not cursed, but were cool. And so now that I have all these funds built up, I probably could have been doing this for much, much longer in the game than I have been. So if I could go back in time, I would tell myself about just use the appraiser in the shop. You're gonna have plenty of cash. But like now, every time I come back from a delve in the dungeon, I am finding some equipment through appraisal that I can use to upgrade one or more, in some cases, of my party members. So I'm always, after a dungeon run, feeling some level of growth, either because of something that's been appraised, and I'm like, okay, cool, or when you sleep at the inn, that's when your XP is applied to level up. You don't level up instantly when you get enough XP to get to that level. You got to go sleep at the inn. So, you're going into these dungeons and you're seeing how far you can push yourself. How many times can I cast this spell? It uses the Vancian magic system, so instead of MP, you gradually learn to cast your individual spells a greater number of times as you advance levels. So you start out maybe being able to cast heal 3 times before you got to go back and rest at the inn. Now I can cast all of my spells 9 times before I have to go back and rest. But even so, I'm pushing myself to see, okay, how deep can I get into the dungeon? How many copies of healing do I have left that I can cast? Or how much do I want to push myself? Maybe I don't need to come out guns blazing with this group. Maybe I can get the job done using this approach to combat, and then I can lean on those devastating nuclear bomb spells for, maybe the next encounter. And because it's random encounters, you're always kind of pushing your luck and prepping in advance to see how far you can end up pushing your luck. And so it's definitely that kind of experience, but getting to some of the negatives, this is not a player-friendly game, especially in English. I mean, systemically, I think already it's not going to be player-friendly, but this is poorly translated, which you're not dealing with in dialogue, you're dealing with in the system menus themselves. And sometimes it's just weird little things, like when the enemies or my allies get healed, the notification that will appear on screen as their health bar fills up is so-and-so regained so many points of strength. And I'm like, strength? You mean health, right? Well, it's just a bad translation. And so there's little things like that you shake your head at and go, what? And then all of the spell names are weird, like Maha Maha for basically just a fire spell or whatever it is. Thankfully, you get to go in and rename all your spells. And the descriptions make sense, like, does fire damage to all enemies in a single row. Okay, so I just rename it Fire Row 1, so I know what it is, just using these very basic Final Fantasy style names for spells. Fire 1, Fire 2, whatever. And so it was a little tedious to get all my spells set up and rename them as I would learn them, but totally worth it. But still, there's some clunky elements of things that I'm not sure, systems that I haven't taken advantage of because I'm like, I'm not sure what they're saying here as they describe what this does. Other times where the description gets cut off even, and you could tell there's more of a sentence there, but like, I don't know, it ran out of room. It's weird stuff. What else? There's very little information about Elminage Original online, at least in English. Because it's not a popular enough game. IGN doesn't have some great wiki walkthrough of the game. The best stuff that I found was in Japanese, and thankfully Google has Google Translate, so I can translate the whole page and have that version bookmarked. But even so, it's kind of clunky now and then, and just a little bit weird. Some walkthrough. I found a walkthrough on GameFAQs that's incomplete. I think I was able to get enough information to figure out most of it, but just one walkthrough, and it's incomplete. So it's a clunky experience. You have to. I think because this was the first game of this type that I found and really discovered my love for, that I was willing to push through all that stuff. I don't know. I was going to say I don't know if I would play another one like this, but here I've already purchased Elminage Gothic, and I think there's a very good chance I'm going to be playing that one at some point. But it is clunky. The graphics are not great on the PSP. Actually, they're really nice on the Vita. Like on a handheld, they hold up really well, and that is visually my preferred way of playing it. My thumb starts getting a little bit cramped playing on my Vita. So I do prefer to play it on the big screen, and just in general, I prefer games on a big screen. My eyes have long since adjusted to the pixelated look of the artwork, but every now and then I'm like, boy, it will be nice to move on to games of this type that have nice, smooth, clean-looking visuals. But as I may have said earlier, you can get this on PC, and I believe the graphics are much better. I saw Dan Tack of Game Informer do a partial playthrough of this he must have been playing on PC. The visuals looked great. So anyway, if any of this sounds interesting to you, you can look for it on PC, as well as Elminage Gothic. But I would say those are like the main things. I would say that the sound effects, there's nothing special about the sound effects. Some of them really fall flat. Some of them are nice. The visuals in terms of walking around, if you've never played a game like this before, the dungeons are nothing special to look at. But that's not what it's about. You have basic looks for the art design of the tiles of the dungeons to set a basic mood or sense of what type of place you're exploring. And then beyond that, you are just filling in the map as you explore, which thankfully there's an auto-map system. The most hardcore old school games of this type don't have that built in. Almost all modern ones do, at least as an option, and this one does. And it's just that satisfaction of filling out the map, checking the boxes, as it were, where every space in the dungeon is its own box to check. And there have been a few. It's not big on puzzles. Some of these games can have puzzles that I just hate puzzles. Hate them, especially if they're abstract. And this game eventually does have some, but not too many. And the few that I was like, what? I don't know what this is. I was able to find not help via the walkthroughs as much, but there's some maps available online that kind of put little symbols in spaces that tell you this is what you'll find here. And so that functions as a walkthrough. It's like, oh, this is where the secret door is. Oh, that kind of thing. So if you're dedicated and you do some creative Googling, I think you can find resources to overcome some of the obscure, obtuse elements. You're like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. And I leaned on those every time I ran into one of those kinds of situations, even if it was a slight puzzle. I'm like, I don't want to trial and error this. Just tell me what dungeon to go to next, what dungeon to clear next, in order to get the next story mission done. So, let's see, what else? I've added this game, I guess, kind of like closing up my thoughts on the gameplay. I've added this to my all-time favorite games list, I'm pretty sure. That plane ride was so memorable, so striking, and just the recurring value that this game has had, and especially now here as I have come back to it and realized I'm not far from the finish line. I'm maybe 10 to 20 hours from the finish line, which for this kind of game, it does feel like a short period of time. But at the same time, I'm still, as I have been for a while with this game, just one obstacle from quitting. All it would take would be one mystery that I can't find information to solve online, and I'd be like, okay, I'm done. This game is not about the story. It's about just extracting what I want from it, and what I want is clearing dungeons. And with interesting yet quick tactical decisions and a constant sense of growing and becoming stronger. And I'm getting that. I just cannot deny, despite the dated, glitchy, or jaggy-looking graphics, at least on the PSP version, the simplistic sound, and all the translation issues and various other clunky things, I cannot deny the satisfaction I feel from this game. What is that about? I like to ask myself that sometimes, both from a human psychological perspective, and then, since there's a lot of overlap with psychology, from a spiritual perspective. Is there something I can figure out about how God has made us? Or maybe, I mean, a lot of people will look back and say, well, it's kind of like your primitive primal brain that's had this wired into it that makes such and such appealing about your work or about the games you play or whatever. And I think that there's some validity to that, but I also look ahead and think to myself, okay, well, Jesus, he had a resurrected body that represents something of what our resurrected bodies as believers will be like. And it's not this radically different thing. It was a physical body that functioned in many ways like our bodies do now, but without the defects, the shortcomings, the pain, and the death. And so what is true of how I am made up biologically, psychologically, that could carry over, that could be something in his eternal kingdom? That there's something I enjoy in games right now that's kind of a foreshadow of that. I've said many times before that games, I believe, in some ways are a foretaste of what work will be like, because work was never meant to be this drudgery, this pain, this frustration. But there are things that we simulate in games that are true of work, but work has frustrations where the games don't, like productivity and this sense of building something up, making something, or renewing something, or exploring and discovering things, learning things. All these things are simulated in the games that we play, but with all the negatives from the real world stripped out, at least at the real world level. Certainly games can be frustrating to some degree, but not frustrating like the real world equivalent. Otherwise, they cease to be a game. But I'm thinking to myself, one thing I love about dungeon crawls is the challenge of planning my way out of unpredictable trouble. You know, with a dungeon crawl, turn-based, grid-based, dungeons-only kind of experience like Elminage Original, I am dealing with random encounters. I don't know exactly what enemies I'm going to face or what combinations of enemies I'm going to face. I don't know what abilities they might have. Especially when I first encounter them, or if maybe I've forgotten what abilities they have, or maybe they've got one they haven't pulled out yet in the previous encounter because the die rolls behind the scenes didn't get around to that. Plenty of random stuff going on, and and what I find myself drawn to in life is planning. Planning to avoid things that I can't know or control in advance. And I think that there's that part of the way I'm wired. There's something about that there's a sanctified, good version of that, but most often I think I recognize the negative element of that. I think the good version of that is wise preparation, especially as it is in this broken world. I think there could be some version of this in the new heaven and new earth, where we don't know what's coming in the future, and so we would have reason to plan and organize and try to account for possibilities. The Spirit might be leading us in that, but still leaving some things unknown. And so there might be something kind of enjoyable about that experience. But certainly in this broken world right now, it is wise and God-honoring to manage to steward our resources well, our skills, the things that we own, our finances, whatever it is, our life situations, to to leverage all that to try and be prepared for the unexpected negative thing that might befall us. And so it's God honoring. Just read Proverbs and you'll pick this up pretty quick. It's God honoring to be wise and think in advance, when the unknown comes tomorrow. But the wrong part of that, the kind of the fleshly, sinful part of that, is finding my peace or putting my faith in my preparation. Which I tend to do when I'm dealing with a problem, instead of at least even briefly saying, Lord, please help me, please guide me as I'm thinking through how to deal with this crappy situation or this stressful situation or whatever. Please guide me and help me to arrive at the things that you want me to arrive at as I think about how to prepare here. Most times I don't do that. That's not my knee-jerk, and I wish it was. It should be. But instead, I just start worrying or tensing or whatever, and I immediately start thinking and planning. And so I think that there's something in these types of games that are dealing with random elements that you're being asked to prepare for by leveraging limited resources, limited abilities, and things like that, and then delving out into the unknown. There's a parallel there. There's something going on there that has to do with how I'm wired, how I think many of us are wired, that I find really interesting, and also interesting to speculate what form of that might carry over that's good in a world without pain and without suffering and without our sin. I don't know. The second thing that I like about these kinds of games is exploring the unknown and discovering the bizarre, but doing so safely. And I cannot wait. I think I'm a nature lover waiting to happen. I think the new heaven and the new earth will be a place for me to really let loose my love of nature. Right now, I only love nature in theory and in video games and in movies maybe, but I don't want to be out in it. We've already had enough scorpions in our house and other things living here in Arizona that I'm like, nature is horrible. I hate camping. I don't want to go on nature walks, I don't want any of that in my life. But I do love discovering and exploring if I'm safe. And Revelation 21, verses 3 through 4 in the ESV says, "And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man." This is after the new heaven and the new earth have come, just after that. "He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore. For the former things have passed away." So it's just going to be a new status quo for humans on Earth. It's going to be totally different, and devoid of danger, devoid of any reason to fear. And I cannot wait to explore and discover what kinds of weird, unusual things God will have for us to discover, but knowing that because of him, I can do that safely and just enjoy the pure joy of surprise. Like, whoa! Instead of going, oh crap! And then finally, I like these kinds of games, and many other types of games for that matter, for that feeling of being powerful, and specifically being powerful over sources of evil and pain and danger. 1 Corinthians 15, verses 50 through 55. Again, this is referring to, does this, no, it doesn't actually refer to Jesus as the first fruits in this verse. But anyway, 1 Corinthians 15, 50 through 55 in the ESV says, "I tell you this, brothers, flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does the perishable inherit the imperishable. Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. For this perishable body must put on the imperishable, and this mortal body must put on immortality. When the perishable puts on the imperishable, and the mortal puts on immortality, then shall come to pass the saying," there's my phone, one more reminder of our constant subjectivity to time and death. It's these schedules, my gosh. "When the perishable puts on the imperishable, and the mortal puts on immortality, then shall come to pass the saying that is written, Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting?" So by nature of our bodies, by nature of the new creation, it's just going to be a different status quo. We will be powerful and immortal, and we will have a different relationship to creation and to nature, to living things, than we've had in this broken world. So anyway, I do find myself not all the time, but recurringly, these kinds of thoughts will pop into my mind. I want them to more frequently come to mind because I think in that way, even when I'm doing something that many of us geeks would kind of segment away from our spiritual lives, playing video games, even when I'm doing that, I can have these good moments now and then where I'm reminded, man, I'm enjoying this because of how God made me, how God made these developers, how God made some facet of this world, and all those, the right elements of those are all coming together to create an experience here I'm really enjoying, that not only I can enjoy in this moment, but that can point me ahead to imagine, to speculate on the amazing future that inadvertently these kinds of experiences can foreshadow. So I hope to take advantage of more opportunities to do that as I play and finish up Elminage Original and games like it. It looks like I'm going to have plenty of opportunity. I am, as I said, over 100 hours into Elminage Original, and after that I've got Stranger of Sword City, then Undernaut's Labyrinth of Yomi, then Labyrinth of Refrain, and on PC with Gamepad, eventually, Elminage Gothic. I told my wife Holly about that the other day, and she said, man, it's like you're starting an awesome new book series of a brand new author you just discovered. I'm like, yes, that is totally the feeling. So I think chances are good that I've got a lot of good gaming in front of me that will hopefully now and then point me to the real hope, the real amazing future that's ahead of us as believers. But that's all for now. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.